A number of 642 Palestinian detainees, including women and children, released from Israeli prisons. Hamas denies Israeli Defense Minister's claims of planned attacks, calls them baseless. And Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's government secures parliamentary approval with 95 votes. It's 8 p.m. Current local time, and you're watching Qnews. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. A total of 642 Palestinian detainees, including women and children, were released from Israeli prisons after Israel delayed implementing the detainee release agreements. According to information provided, the release of Palestinian detainees, including women and children, by Hamas was originally planned for February 22nd but was postponed. Hamas reiterated its commitment to the ceasefire and readiness for the second phase of negotiations. Hamas further emphasized that negotiations detainees' bodies marked the final operation in the first phase. Hamas has confirmed its readiness to start the second phase of ceasefire negotiations in Gaza following the release of hundreds of Palestinian detainees from Israeli prisons in exchange for the bodies of 4 Israeli detainees. Hamas stated that Israel's attempts to delay the release failed and emphasized the synchronization of the process to ensure Israel met its commitments. Hamas reiterated its commitment to the ceasefire and stressed that negotiations are the only solution for Israeli detainees in Gaza. Israeli President Ishaq Herzog has confirmed the identification of the remains of 4 Israeli detainees: Tzahi Yidan, Itzhak Al-Garat, Ehud Yahoulumi, and Shlomo Mansour. In a post on X, he stated that efforts are being made to bring both the living and deceased detainees back from Gaza. This came after the International Committee of the Red Cross received the bodies and they were transferred to Israel via the Karm Abu Salam border crossing in southeast of Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to work relentlessly to secure the release of all detainees held in Gaza. Netanyahu is set to hold security consultations today with several ministers and top security officials to assess the situation following the conclusion of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has announced that the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement has concluded, confirming the release of 25 detainees. Katz claimed that the best way to secure the release of all remaining detainees is for Hamas to understand that the Israeli military is prepared to resume the war. He also noted that negotiations in their various stages have focused on the release of only 10 to 12 detainees at a time. Hamas has dismissed Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz's claims that they planned attacks on soldiers and settlements during the ceasefire, calling them misleading and baseless. In a statement, Hamas accused Israel of attempting to evade its commitments under the agreement. Hamas additionally reaffirmed its full adherence to the ceasefire and expressed readiness to enter negotiations for the second phase. Hamas also urged immediate action to ensure Israel complies with the terms of the agreement. Israel's escalating military operations in the West Bank intensify tensions, fueling international condemnations. The details.
The West Bank is currently witnessing an unprecedented escalation in Israeli military operations, with recent attacks such as those in Tulkarm that resulted in the deaths of 2 Palestinian children, heightening the gravity of the situation. This escalation, particularly in areas like Nablus, Tulkarm, and Al-Khalil, reflects Israel's broader strategy of exerting control over the region through military pressure, settlement expansion, and the continued suppression of Palestinian resistance. At the core of Israel's actions is the policy of territorial Judaization, which seeks to alter the demographic makeup of the region by encouraging Israeli settlements, confiscating Palestinian land, and displacing local populations. The ongoing military operations, including raids into refugee camps, further aim to dismantle Palestinian Authority structures and prevent any meaningful political reconciliation, thus weakening the Palestinian cause. The consequences of these actions are profound. They deepen divisions between Palestinians and Israelis, generating widespread resentment. This relentless aggression undermines hopes for peace, escalating tensions and increasing calls for Palestinian unity in the face of Israeli occupation. The continued targeting of civilians and infrastructure exacerbates the sense of insecurity and injustice within Palestinian communities. International reactions to Israel's actions have been largely rhetorical, with the United Nations expressing concern but taking no substantial action. Many states, while voicing disapproval, have shown limited practical response. As Israel pursues its territorial objectives, the future of Palestine's sovereignty remains at risk. With the international community's inaction contributing to further instability, the Palestinian cause faces a critical juncture.
Now we move on to the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين. وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's government has received parliamentary approval, securing 95 out of the 128 votes. In his speech after the vote, Salam emphasized that the word "we want" in the government's policy statements reflects commitment, not a mere wish. He highlighted his commitment to the principles set during government formation and called for a return to proper parliamentary practices. Salam reaffirmed the government's commitment to liberating Lebanese territory, upholding Resolution 1701 and defending Lebanon's sovereignty. Egypt has welcomed the Lebanese government's approval by the parliament, highlighting the significant steps towards restoring Lebanon's security, stability, sovereignty, and unity. In a statement by the Foreign Ministry, Egypt emphasized its full solidarity with Lebanon, offering continued support to the Lebanese government and institutions based on their historical and strong relations. Furthermore, Egypt reaffirmed its stance on the implementation of the ceasefire in southern Lebanon, advocating for Israel's full and immediate withdrawal from the area, as well as full application of UN Resolution 1701. Israel Defense Minister Israel Katz has announced that Israel has received green light from the United States to maintain its forces in the buffer zone in Lebanon. In his statements, the Israeli Defense Minister mentioned that his forces will remain in the buffer zone in Lebanon indefinitely after receiving the green light from the United States. Now we move on to the latest developments in Syria. Egypt has strongly condemned Israel's recent attacks on Syrian territories as a deliberate escalation and clear violation of international law and the UN Charter. A Foreign Ministry statement stressed that these actions worsen tensions and undermine Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry urged international bodies and the UN Security Council to hold Israel accountable and end such violations. The ministry further emphasized the need for Israel's withdrawal from Syrian lands in line with the 1974 disengagement agreements. Saudi Arabia has condemned the recent Israeli attacks on Syrian territories and its attempts to destabilize the country in repeated violations of the international agreements and laws. The Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed its condemnation and denunciation of Israeli occupation forces' bombing of several areas in Syria and their attempts to destabilize its security and stability in repeated violations of relevant international agreements and laws. The Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has condemned Israel's recent air and ground attacks on southern Syria and Damascus suburbs. Spokesperson Ismail Baghai warned of Israel's ongoing expansionist action in Syria, and the international community and the Muslim countries urged them to take decisive measures against these violations. He emphasized that Israel's occupation of Syrian territories and sovereignty breaches are acts of aggression, calling for a swift UN Security Council response to restore peace and security. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric has announced that nearly 408 trucks have entered Syria via Turkey since the beginning of this year, marking a five-fold increase compared to the same period last year. He added in his statements that the United Nations and its partners continue to provide humanitarian assistance as long as security, logistical, and financial conditions allow, but he warned that the scale of destruction remains enormous. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin has met with UN Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, to discuss the current situation in Syria. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that an in-depth discussion took place on the full range of issues related to Syria, including the current situation on the ground, the tasks of international humanitarian assistance to Syria, and the strengthening of inclusive political process led and implemented by the Syrians themselves with the support of the United Nations.
So I'm looking forward to extensive and hopefully good discussions.
We now move to the latest developments in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Russia expects the diplomatic talks between Russia and the US officials in Istanbul to be the first in a series of meetings aimed at easing tensions and addressing key issues in their relationship. According to the Russian Foreign Ministry, the discussions in Turkey are focused on removing obstacles and strengthening confidence-building measures. Moscow views these expert consultations as a step forward, overcoming disagreements and fostering more stable diplomatic ties with Washington.
Сохраняются, к сожалению, в двустороннем диалоге из-за той.
The Kremlin has emphasized the need for continued dialogue with the United States, stating that progress depends on political will from both sides and a readiness to engage to meaningful discussions. The statement comes as Russian and US diplomats meet in Istanbul for talks aimed at resolving long-standing disputes over diplomatic missions. The discussions are seen as a critical test of their ability to reset broader relations and work towards ending the conflict in Ukraine. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump stated that Russia would need to make territorial concessions in any future negotiations with Ukraine, but asserted that Kiev should abandon its aspirations to join NATO. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to visit Washington on Friday to sign a key agreement on rare earth minerals. The deal is seen as crucial for Ukraine's efforts to secure US support as President Donald Trump pushes for a swift resolution to the war with Russia. Ahead of his White House visit, Zelensky stated that the success of the agreement depends on his discussions with Trump. Meanwhile, Trump described the deal as very big, emphasizing its inclusion of rare earth minerals and other critical resources. The agreement follows rising tensions between the two leaders. After meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron, Trump suggested that war could end within weeks, though he provided no details. Russia and Ukraine have both claimed to have shot down over 100 enemy drones in escalating aerial battles as intense fighting continues on multiple fronts. Russia's defense ministry reported that between Tuesday night and Wednesday, its air defense systems intercepted 128 Ukrainian drones, including 83 targeting the Krasnodar region and 30 over Russian-controlled Crimea. Russian media described it as Ukraine's largest drone offensive against Russia this year. The ministry also stated that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks. Meanwhile, Ukraine's forces reported that Russia had launched 177 drones and 3 missiles against Ukrainian targets. In Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron has held a video conference with EU leaders to debrief his meeting with US President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. earlier this week. Earlier, Macron met with Trump to urge security guarantees for Ukraine. The week prior, Trump placed into question US involvement in the conflict. The leaders will meet for an extraordinary summit on March 6th to discuss additional support for Ukraine, European security guarantees, and how to pay for European defense needs.
We need to wait a little bit for Olympic has to wait a little bit.
Moving on to the economics segment, and in the stock markets, global shares showed a mixed performance on Thursday. Futures for the S&P's 500 inched down 0.08%, while those for the Dow Jones Industrial Average hiked 0.78%. In Europe, France CAC 40 was down 0.59%, and the Germany's DAX decreased 1.1%, while Britain's FTSE 100 hiked 0.25%. In Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index dipped 0.29%, while the Shanghai Composite rose 0.23%. The Nikkei 225 increased 0.3%. Oil prices rose more than 1.5% on Thursday as supply concerns resurfaced after U.S. President Donald Trump revoked a license granted to U.S. oil major Chevron to operate in Venezuela. Gains were capped, however, by signs of a potential peace deal in Ukraine, which could result in higher Russian oil flows and an unexpected rise in U.S. gasoline and distillate stocks. Brent crude oil futures were up 1.5% at $73.63 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude oil futures rose 1.7% to $69.67. Gold prices dropped to their lowest levels in over 2 weeks on Thursday as U.S. dollar strengthened, with investors waiting for key inflation data that could shed light on the Federal Reserve's monetary policy path. Spot gold was down 1.2% at $2,882.49 an ounce, after hitting its lowest level since February 12th earlier in this season. Prices hit a record high of $2,956.15 on Monday, driven by safe haven flows. U.S. gold futures lost 1.2% to $2,894.50. The dollar index rose 0.7%, making greenback price Bulletin bullion more expensive for holders of other currencies. The Labor Department has reported that the number of Americans filing new claims for unemployment benefits rose more than expected last week, increasing by 22,000 to a seasonally adjusted 242,000. The report also highlighted concerns over the mass layoffs of federal workers by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, though these have yet to impact unemployment compensation data. Economists warn that such layoffs could ripple through the economy, affecting private sector jobs. Meanwhile, continuing claims fell slightly to 1,862 million, and the unemployment rate held at 4% in January. The Commerce Department's Consensus Bureau has reported that new orders for key U.S. manufactured capital goods surged in January, signaling a potential rebound in business spending on equipment for the first quarter. Orders for non-defense capital goods, excluding aircraft, a key indicator of business investment plans, rose 0.8% after a modest 0.2% gain in December. The increase exceeded economists' expectation of a 0.3% rise. However, shipments of core capital goods dipped 0.3%, while non-defense capital goods orders rebounded sharply by 12.9% after a 5.3% drop in December. Shipments of these goods, which factor into GDP calculations, rose 3.2%. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. A number of 642 Palestinian detainees, including women and children, released from Israeli prisons. Hamas denies Israeli defense minister's claims of planned attacks, called them baseless. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam's government secured parliamentary approval with 95 votes. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching, and good night.